The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 957, coming to you on Monday the 16th of December 2019. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic, be careful about lending your deed. But before getting into the topic, a brief preliminary, namely, condolences go out to all families which have suffered recent bereavements. And I get straight into the topic, except to whisper a little anniversary congratulation belatedly, because yesterday was the anniversary, to a couple of my acquaintance. They have been married for 46 years, and I therefore send belated congratulatory anniversary greetings to Mr. P.R Campbell and Bishop Juliet Campbell. Okay. I'm laughing because I'm taping this program on Monday afternoon. And when the program comes over, most likely I'll be at home looking at it. And who would be there looking at it looking at the program with me? The said Bishop Juliet Campbell. And she doesn't often see the humor in these things. So, my dearly beloved wife, thank you for 46 years of companionship. All right. Be careful about lending your deed. Over the years, several sad stories have come to my attention concerning the alleged lending of deeds. Now, a deed is not something you can readily lend and borrow, but within family circles, you would usually have the case where children want to raise some funds by way of a mortgage. They don't have a deed. They want to use the parents' deed, and they ask the parents to lend them the title deed to be used as security for a mortgage loan. You would seldom come across the question of the lending of a title deed between strangers. But I've come across instances where parents have been tricked. Instances where, instead of signing to guarantee a mortgage loan, parents have in fact been signing the deed over to the children or the child in question. Now, as to whether fraud was involved, one does not know. But like all transactions involving property, persons are required to exercise caution Now, when people are up and about and they're healthy and strong, nobody would try to take liberties with them. Nobody will try to trick them and say, well, Daddy, I want you to lend me a deed, which and while it might be a plan by the child to get the parent to sign over the deed as a gift. But where parents, or especially when one parent has died and one is alive, but the one who is alive is not in perfect health, sickly, and is getting down in age, is getting forgetful, and suffering from mental blemishes, you find in the odd case that a child of the family is trying to take advantage of that. So the law generally requires persons to be cautious, to know what you are doing when you sign a document. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with a parent using a title deed to assist a child financially. Nothing wrong at all. So the child might want to raise a loan, could be a student loan or for any other purpose. Child does not have, when I say child, I mean an adult, not a child under the age of 18, because transactions cannot take place involving persons who are under 18, transactions in land. So when I say child, I simply mean a child in the sense of an offspring, not a little picnic. Very often, an offspring gets into difficulty and would like some assistance, goes to a credit union or a bank and asks for a loan, and the lending institution, through the lending officer, would inquire as to the security that is expected to be offered for this loan. And in the course of the conversation, the offspring may reveal that he or her father has a title deed to either the family home or another property or another piece of land. And upon making further inquiries, the lending officer may suggest that perhaps that offspring could ask the parent permission to use the parent's title deed as part of the security arrangements for that intended loan. Nothing wrong with that at all. The offspring has a good job, secure, and the loan is of a manageable size in terms of the salary for the offspring. The lending agency may not have any difficulty saying, well, if you get your father or mother, as the case may be, or both, to come in with their title deed, we will see what we can do for you. Now, the first thing you must notice there is that no lending officer would discuss an arrangement of that kind without suggesting that the parent whose title deed is expected to be used, ought to be brought into the picture, be thoroughly familiar with the plan, and be quite happy to get involved in assisting the offspring in that regard. So knowledge of the person whose deed is going to be used is very important. They would understand that if they lend their deed to be used as security for a loan by the offspring, and things go wrong and the loan cannot be repaid, the parents would know that the property used as security would be at risk. If, for example, the offspring loses his or her job, or takes seriously ill and is unable to work, unable to earn, then in those sad circumstances, the time might come in the life of the loan arrangement where the property has to be sold, and the proceeds of sale go towards the outstanding debt. And if anything is left back, then the borrower or the parent, as the case may be, would get it. And therefore, the first point that has to be grasped is that knowledge of the nature of the transaction is vital. Things must be explained to the person who is putting up his or her deed as security for somebody else's loan, even an offspring. And therefore, a meeting would normally take place in the office of the lending officer of the institution. In fact, more than one meeting ought to take place so that the lending officer can satisfy himself or herself that the parent thoroughly understands what is involved and is willing to assume the risk of using his or her title deed as security for the loan proposed to be made by his or her offspring. Excuse me. There are certain routine matters to which the lending officer would pay attention. The lending officer would make sure that the value, the commercial value of the property reflected in the deed is such that it can cover the risk. For example, if somebody is borrowing $75,000, the lending officer, according to the guidelines for that institution, would want to make sure that the property is worth at least twice the amount of the intended loan, so that if you have a property worth $80,000, no lending institution is going to lend more than half the value. And indeed, some may not lend as much as half. But the bank is not going to, or credit union is not going to lend anybody $60,000 on the security of a property worth $75,000. And each institution has its own guidelines, and they generally want to make sure that the property is at least twice, sometimes more than that, but at least twice the amount in value of what is proposed to be borrowed. Then the lending officer will have to consider how relatively easy or difficult it is likely to be to sell that property if the loan cannot be repaid. It is one thing to have a property which is theoretically of the requisite value, that is twice or 2.5 times the size of the loan. But the lending officer, from his or her experience, would know that it is difficult to sell properties in some localities and relatively easy in other localities. So that if you have a case where there is a particular village where there are hardly any land transactions taking place, difficult to get lands or properties sold, that will color the readiness of that lending officer to recommend that that particular deed be used for that loan. But all things being equal, if the lending officer is satisfied with the arrangement and thinks that, okay, if this loan for any reason goes into arrears and cannot be repaid and we have to sell the property, it would be relatively easy to get the property sold, and we would be able to get back what is owing plus outstanding interest. This is why these negotiations take time. When you go to sit down to negotiate a loan, depending on the size of the loan, the purposes of the loan, your own circumstances, the chances of repayment, or the difficulty, or whatever circumstances there are, the lending officer has a professional responsibility to protect the interest of the institution that employs him or her. The lending officer isn't there as your friend, even though he may be friendly with you. He is there to do his job in a responsible and professional manner. He cannot do things on the basis of friend-friend relationship. Or because he likes you, he bends the rules. No, sooner or later he's going to get into trouble and lose his job. And nobody is going to be willing to lose his or her job because of they're trying to extend a favor to a friend. So there are things they have to check out. One of the things they check on, and many people might not be fully aware, might be the lifestyle of the person who wants the money to borrow. I mean, I'm thinking about first-time borrowers. If you're accustomed borrowing and they have a track record, they know you. But they may want to know that, okay, here is a single man in his early 30s or mid 30s, and by their investigations and in answering questions he poses to them, he has 6 or 7 children with 4 or 5 different women, then he may not strike them as a stable, serious character who is likely to take his financial responsibilities seriously. And the lending officer, of course, would look at the income of the person and look at the normal expenses the person has to meet when the month is up to satisfy himself or herself that this person can afford to pay back a loan of the installment that he wants to borrow and that which the lending agency is capable of arranging with him. So that if a man's salary or person's salary is, say, in the area of $3,500 a month, lending officer would want to know what are your expenses, the monthly expenses. And if you get a salary of $3,500 a month, but your expenses are almost $3,000, it means you only have $500 of disposable income left over normally from your salary. How are you going to pay back a loan out of that? So these are things the lending agencies check on, and these things take time to organize. But assuming that everything checks out, then the parent may have no difficulty saying to the lending officer, yes, I would willingly sign the deed as guarantee for the loan. So the parent has to sign the mortgage as guarantor, putting up his title deed as the security document, because his offspring who wants to borrow the money hasn't got security of his own to offer to the lending institution. These things happen all the time, and usually everything goes well, except, as I said, there are always unforeseen challenges in the human condition. Sometimes things just go wrong. And when people are making financial plans, they generally have to factor in the possibility that things may go wrong. But the mortgage document would try to cover all the expected eventualities and even cater for some non-expected eventuality. Now, so let us assume everything goes through, the loan is made, disbursed, the borrower pays back month by month, and then the time comes when the loan is finished paying. Then the institution would be called upon to sign a deed of reconveyance to reconvey the property back to the parent who had loaned it in the first place, who had loaned the deed. Because when a deed is used as security, what really happens, that deed becomes the property of the bank or the credit union or whichever institution has loaned the money. The property reflected by the deed becomes theirs. But when the deed is repaid, then the deed is, when the loan is repaid, the deed is reconveyed to the person who had loaned the deed in the first place. So if all goes well over the life of the loan is repaid, a deed of reconveyance is done, the parent gets back his or her title deed, and that is fine. The turn may come for another sibling in the family or some other relative to go through the same procedure to try and borrow the deed to be used as security for a loan. But you have to be aware that some relatives, even sons and daughters, may become a bit dishonest and may want to pull a fast one. They may want to pull a trick on the parent. Usually, your children by themselves would not try to trick you, but when they fall into marriage or they have other attachments, they may be induced by their new life partners to stray away from the straight and narrow. In those cases, the institution would be very careful, and indeed the lawyer who is advising on the transaction would also have a duty of care to see to it that things are done for the right reason and in the proper manner. But every now and then you get somebody coming up with some kind of worthlessness and try to pull a fast one on an elderly parent or relative. But short of those incidents of trickery, the lending of a deed can be a very useful way of assisting somebody who wants a loan but hasn't got the security to get through with the loan, relying on your putting up your deed as security for him or her. Okay? Well, that brings me to the end of this program. 2 more to go before the end of the year. I see the tongue is extremely busy, and I know a lot of people are doing well this Christmas time, judging by the number of shoppers I see on the street. Enjoy the Christmas season, and I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday, DV, for another presentation in this public service nation building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.